This is the After Party. Your hosts are the Great Order and No White Guild. As for the crown winner of last week, hold your breath, hold your breath. The crown goes to, I think this is tying the record, the previous record, Mrs. Jess Horst. Financially gifting 15. We are saving white children dollars. Congratulations. Thank you. And plaudits, my dear lady. In second place was Hansa, financially gifting $5. Congratulations and thank you in addition. Financially gift on Entropy, I'll have it up in a moment at 15%, where you can also watch the stream and ask and vote on questions that won't disappear unless you or I delete them. You can also financially gift on Cash App, and as you know, Jared and I, we evenly share the financial gifts with our guests here on the After Party. Now today we have one of our favorites, PhilosophiCat, on tap. Dear lady, please introduce yourself to our esteemed community. Tell them where they can find you, and then Mr. George will take us into this sterling conversation.
Hi, well, I think most people probably know me by now because I've been coming on your show for a few years at this point. And I think you guys, if I remember correctly, you were the first live stream that I ever did where like I'd done pre-recorded.
Yes.
You're like, no, come on our live show. I was like, oh, I've never done it live before. But yeah, so I've been on here a few times now. So if anybody doesn't know me, they must be fairly new followers of yours.
We have a lot of new people all the time, so do take a moment to tell them about yourself.
Yes, I did notice that Jason's channel has grown a fair bit since I was probably last on. So I'm PhilosophiCat, and I have a YouTube channel, and I'm a musician, and my main project at the moment is making kind of a documentary series of Julius Evola's book Revolt Against the Modern World, where we're taking each chapter and sort of breaking it down, explaining it a little bit more in depth, and just putting some really cool audio-visual stuff with all of that. So it's not just, me sitting in front of a camera, which is, maybe that's a little bit more boring for people. I don't know. So yeah, that's what I mainly work on, and we have episode 10 of that series probably ready to drop next week, I think. And yeah, so that's kind of me.
All right, well, especially if anyone's new too, if you're curious after you listen to today's episode, you want to hear more from PhilosophiCat with us, go to theafterparty.tv or our respective websites, my website, Jason's website. We have all that cataloged. She's been on the After Party a couple of times, and then some of the other shows, the side projects, a couple of times as well. So we've spoken. I forgot that we were the ones who actually introduced you to live streaming. So we'll put that feather in our cap if you'll allow us. Yes. But why don't you tell us a little about what you've been up to? We want to get into some of the things you talk about in your video series, but you also did kind of a novelty thing recently with Zurius, a guided meditation. I was curious as to what was behind that and why you thought that you could contribute something to guided meditation, why there was a need for that in the spheres you deal in your own online work.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a different type of content for my channel because obviously it's not something that I've done before. But I do recommend meditation a lot to people for a variety of reasons. And I believe it was probably after last Christmas's appearance on Millennial, where I'm pretty sure I talked about meditation there. And I know Zurius had also done a show, and he said he'd listened to it. He got in touch with me a while back and had this idea for a guided meditation because, as it turns out, he is also a meditator, and it's something he's been doing for a long time. He knows a lot about the subject, which really surprised me because I didn't know that about him. I just, he's the Fash Wave guy, right?
He doesn't do many live streams, but he's been on tap. I think it was September 2018, Jason, if I remember. And yeah, he's actually a pretty spiritual guy. We talked a little about metaphysics.
Yeah, he is. So he he reached out and asked if I'd be willing to make that with him, just because he doesn't have a YouTube platform anymore, and so he needs somewhere to host it. And he liked my narration style from the Revolt series, and he wanted to compose the music for it, and I thought it seemed like a really great idea. So kind of between the two of us, we sort of came up with how we wanted to do it, sort of incorporating a few different aspects from different types of meditation in a way that would be suitable for a total beginner. So when you first start meditating, one of the first things you realize is, the parasitic nature of the mind. And if you're doing, say, breath meditation, right, you're just supposed to be focusing on your breath, which sounds really boring. Like, if you people in the audience want to just try this now, just like close your eyes for a second and just start breathing in and out and just try to focus.
Guided meditation. Take them through it.
Oh, I'm not going to take them through it because this is actually going to be really quick. But if you just close your eyes and try to focus on your breath without another thought creeping in, you will find that you can't get more than about 1 or 2 breaths before your mind starts going its own direction. So who's really in charge here? Is it you or is it your mind, right? And when you're just starting out with meditation, that can be a big source of frustration. This fact that you cannot control the mind. You're not, you feel like you're supposed to be focusing on the breath or, some other object of meditation, a mantra or whatever. And you can't because your mind's running all over the place. You're thinking about what are you going to have for dinner, or something that you said to somebody else that now really just makes you cringe and you can't get it out of your head how stupid you sounded, or whatever it is that your mind is just latching onto. And of course, we can't turn off our thoughts. There's no way to stop your thoughts. That's not the purpose of meditation. What you want to learn to do is discipline the mind such that you can just observe those thoughts as they go by, as if they're passing traffic. You don't sit there and watch a line of cars go by and be like, oh, that's a cool looking car, and then get up and start running down the street after it. You'd look pretty silly doing that. Well, it's the same thing with your mind, right? And the thoughts that go in your mind. So in order to kind of combat this, a guided meditation can be a really good tool for a beginner because it's giving you something to focus on other than just breath or just a mantra or something. So as we kind of take you through the meditation, we're teaching you kind of like how to sort of scan the body and just try to relax and sort of let go of some of that, whatever tension or anxiety might be in your day. And as we kind of like walk you through that, you're just getting a new, different thing to focus on as you go through. And we don't linger too long on any of them. So there's no time for your mind to get bored and start going in its own direction. So it's just a short little 15-minute thing. It's something that's very easy to fit 15 minutes of meditation in every day, whether you do it when you wake up or on your lunch break or before bed. A lot of people said they fell asleep doing it, so maybe before bed is a good time to do it, or if you want to be more alert for it, maybe earlier is better. Because obviously you are trying to discipline your mind, not just fall asleep. Although if you struggle from insomnia, that is a great benefit. So yeah, that's kind of where we sort of came up with that idea and why we decided to do that. And just because I recommend it so often and it's such a key component of, a spiritual path, it seemed like it might be a really good thing to try and just see if people liked it, which overwhelmingly they seem to like it. So maybe we'll do another one in the future.
Yeah, your narration for it is great. I listened to bits of it before we got on air tonight, and it's really well done. The visuals, Zurius's ambient music in the background, and your meditation, it's all comes together perfectly.
Oh, thank you.
Why? So this might be able to get us into other subjects now and things that you spend a lot of your time focusing on and are near and dear to you. Why you think that something like this is needed right now, and what you might say to people who might scoff at that kind of thing and think it sounds kind of airy-fairy. There's a lot of focus that you have on a holistic, kind of a bigger picture view than just materialism. And that definitely plays into a lot of the things that we talk about here, and it touches on a lot of tangential points as well. So not a super specific question, but we can get into this as a bridge as to some of the other stuff you do as to why you think something like that is necessary. And then we can start talking about your metaphysical work and traditional, your study of Evola and all of that kind of thing.
Yes, well, it's not going to come as a surprise to anybody in the audience that the world kind of seems to be falling apart right now. We definitely live in a very degenerate age. We are under attack from all angles. The one thing they cannot take away from you or control is your own mind. And, they do try. They do try to do that. They're always trying to emotionally manipulate us, to control us through, various weaponized feelings that we may have, like how they stir up all of this fear and hysteria around COVID to get people to agree to things that they never would agree to otherwise. When you are kind of being sucked in by those passions that are stirred up, you're not in control of your mind, but you can learn to be. And then when you learn to do that, you can take a more objective view of the world and a more detached view of the world. And by detached, I don't mean that you become apathetic and you don't care. But it allows you to see what it is that you need to do and do it without fear or anxiety or hesitation, such that you become paralyzed, which is, it seems to happen a lot that people don't take action because they are often paralyzed by just the confusion that they are always throwing at us, like all the gaslighting that they do to us and all the manipulation, the propaganda. How could somebody not be subject to that all the time and not feel completely disoriented and unsure of the world? Like, it just doesn't even seem like a stable world for a lot of people. So that's why you need to build that internally in yourself, and you can build up that strong foundation in yourself that they can never take away from you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right that that's the kind of thing that's very, very, very important this year. It's always important. But where do you draw the line? How do you navigate that personally? Because that's a tough thing where you can fall into kind of the ostrich syndrome on the one hand, or on the other hand, totally imbibing in the narrative, like you were saying, and this news that is blasted out from these centers of power that you have no connection to and are scripted and read by people you have no connection to, and to varying degrees actually don't have your best interests at heart. We'll say that. Many people internalize such things, and they have emotional responses, but of course there's a physiological component to your emotional responses. You can be literally, this whole situation and the things we've seen this year, Jason and I have spoken about this here, can be affecting your health. It can be taking years off people's lives with the stress levels and what it does to the body if they totally take all this in. But on the other hand, as we said, it's not like you can act like nothing's going on either. So I wouldn't be surprised if you've given this some thought, that balance in your own life. So I'm very curious to hear how you navigate that.
Sorry, I was trying to click the mute button to unmute, and I had this pop up on my screen, and I had to get rid of that first. So now I've lost my train of thought. Can you just sum up your question one more time?
Navigating the mute button is the eternal
First it was my cat, now it's pop-ups and the mute button.
Are we able to get the name of your cat on air, or is that too personal? Have we ever gotten the name of the cat, Jason?
I've never told anyone his name. I feel like I shouldn't violate his privacy.
Okay. We understand that. These are tricky times, so say no more.
They are. But yes, if you could just sum up your question again for me, because anytime I get a distraction, I just then completely lose my train of thought.
It's navigating between the ostrich syndrome on the one hand, and on the other hand, totally imbibing in the narrative and letting that negatively impact your health, and having other people, news and media get into your mind. how do you balance those things? What's your frame around that?
Yeah, I really do think that you need to kind of set a limit on how much of that stuff you're allowing into your headspace. If you are on social media all day, reading the news all day, you are going to end up with some mental health problems from that. How could you not? It's constantly negative. It's black pilling. And I know it can be addictive to kind of want to just continuously keep up with the news cycle, but honestly, most of what's relevant can fit into an hour a day or less. And so you do kind of need to decide like what your time limit is going to be. And, this is another thing that meditation can help with, is just developing awareness of these things. If you can develop the awareness to know when do you start to approach your limit on that kind of consumption? At what point in my scanning of Twitter do I start to feel like I'm not as happy as I was when I opened up my computer?
Right.
Some days it's like within 10 seconds.
Yeah. Sometimes you
But it's
wonder,
kind of like,
why am I here? Why am I doing
yeah,
this?
but it's like, do you notice that you're starting to feel tense in the body? Are you starting to feel anxious or irritable because of what you're reading? And that's a sign that you have probably been partaking in that a little bit too much, and you need to either back off or set some limits and stuff. I've even just kind of started, when I feel like I've just had enough and I just want to check out and recharge, I'll just shut down my social media for a while and just deactivate it or just log out, whatever, and take, a day or several days or a couple weeks or just however long I feel like I need it. And I just deactivate it so that I don't even have to think about like, oh, who's sending me a message that I need to respond to? Because now you can't send me a message. So it just kind of removes like the feeling of like an obligation to check it.
Plausible
And
deniability. I don't have a Twitter
yeah.
account right now. I didn't see your DM.
Yeah, and look, if it's something really urgent, it's not that hard to find an email address to get in touch with me, but it does cut down on the amount I feel like I have to engage with people when I really just need some me time to refill my own cup, because I can't really fill other people's cup for them if my own is empty. But just in terms of kind of dealing with the modern world in general, and it's not even just the news cycle and stuff. I mean, especially this year where we've all to some extent or another suffered from lockdowns. Many people have lost their jobs or not been able to see loved ones, or they've just been missing things in their life that were meaningful to them. Like for me, one of the things I love to do when I was feeling like I needed to recharge was to get out of the city and go hiking, and I've not been able to do that all year. So and I'm sure I'm not the only one in that position who feels that way.
You have not been able to do that.
No, it's not allowed. So I'm under house arrest and stuck in the city for pretty much the vast majority of the year. And that kind of thing alone, that's going to take its toll on people's well-being. So yeah, how do you find a way around that? It would be, I think, unrealistic to say that you're not going to suffer at all because of it. But you can certainly find ways of moderating the effects of it. And a big part of that is just about mindset. Now, for some people, that's going to seem very unrealistic if they've been under just such crushing levels of stress and anxiety, like people who are facing, potentially like losing their homes because they can't pay their mortgage. Like I can't really tell somebody, oh, just go meditate and it will all feel fine, because the problem's still there when you're done meditating and it needs to be dealt with, and you need to find a solution. But there does come a point, I think, where you have to say to yourself that, like, yes, this is a big problem. I do need to do something with it. But right now my mind's just going around in circles and I'm not even coming up with any new ideas. And since I can't do anything about it right this second, and I don't have any new ideas, I'm not going to allow myself to dwell on this anymore today. I can pick it up again tomorrow, but not today. And And again, that's part of like mental discipline and having that kind of control. But also, I think just developing a spiritual life in general can kind of put things in perspective too. I mean, it's sort of like, if you ever go out and get out of the city where there's no light pollution, and you can kind of look up at the night sky and just like see all the stars, and you realize like how far away they are and just how vast the universe is, and you feel so small in comparison looking up at that, right? And it kind of like puts your own life into perspective a little bit, that you're actually not the center of the universe. There are things out there beyond, and when you have a spiritual life, to kind of put some perspective on that and realize that this is just this material existence. It is actually very short. Nothing that happens in this life is really something that we can carry into the next life. And yeah, we do all face our challenges, and some of them are really horrible and terrible and traumatizing. But I do think having that spiritual orientation can help people cope with it a little bit better without losing all hope or becoming nihilistic.
What has been your experience of, as you increase those practices like meditation or whatever else of your spiritual life that you want to discuss? You said something when you spoke about Twitter a few minutes ago. You mentioned being aware of your body, being aware of getting tenser, being, as you said, less happy than the few minutes ago when you went on Twitter. What has been your experience as you increase mental or spiritual exercises, that you're more aware of your body? And in turn, how is that given more dimension to your understanding of the symbiosis or the relationship between material and spiritual?
Well, sometimes medical science is not always up to speed on these things, but even they do admit this to a degree. What goes on in your psychology affects your body. Psychological disturbances do manifest as pain in the body. And there is a link there between those things. There's various spiritual explanations for why that's the case. Most spiritual traditions will agree that there is a link between those things. Your spiritual health absolutely does manifest in the body. So, you do need to take care of both. That's not to say that, a spiritual practice is going to cure you of everything. There are some people who really strongly believe in like vibrational medicine and stuff like that, which is not something I'm particularly well read in, but it is something you can Google if you're interested in that kind of thing. But in terms of being aware of the body and the practice of meditation to help with that, like for example, if you go on one of those 10-day Vipassana courses and stuff, scanning the body is one of the things that they teach you to do. You become very aware of your body at like a very fine level. And, once you're aware of what's going on in your body, and you understand that there's a link between your, what's going on in your mind and what's manifesting in your body, noticing those cues in the body can give you clues as to what you should or shouldn't be doing, in the same way that emotions do. I mean, if you're feeling angry about something, that's a sign that something in your environment is making you unhappy and you need to change it, or you need to change something about yourself and the way you react to it. But a lot of people aren't very in touch with their emotions. And so I think for some people, being more aware of the body might actually be helpful for them. Some people are just more body-based like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as we were saying, like, we're talking about breathing a little bit in the chat. I know that if you breathe high in the chest and shallow, I mean, it literally, you can't be in certain states of openness and certain emotional states if you're doing that kind of breathing. There's certain things you can achieve only when you're breathing into the lower parts of your body, and the breath fills from the bottom and then fills you up. There's so much more anxiety and keeping you in a state of fight or flight if you're doing that shallow chest breathing. And so most people, that's how they breathe I have to be aware of it all the time, try to be conscious of it. But yeah, going on where we were going with this, your own practices of it, your own experience of it, how does it conceive? Because I know this is something you talk about in your videos, and we can get to now speaking a little bit more about the series that you're doing. Give you a sense of the relationship between the spiritual and the physical, and the ways that are they really two different ways of saying the same thing, or are there still, in your conception or your understanding and what you've studied, enough differentiations where you make delineations, and then how do you conceptualize the relationship between spiritual, physical?
Well, that can kind of get into something else that we're going to talk about later, but it might be a good segue. Because I know you wanted to ask about the like the trad school video that I did. And that was in response to Apollonian Germ's video.
Yeah, go wherever you feel
let me
most strong
just
with.
kind of take a roundabout way of getting there, and we can sort of hit two birds with one stone, maybe. So
feed two birds with one stone. That's what we like to say here. We feed, or with one seed.
Feed one seed.
Feed two birds with one seed.
I like that. I'm going to use that. That's much nicer, because I don't want to hurt any birds.
We love animals. Yes, we're positive people.
I might be called Cat, but I don't actually like killing birds, unlike some people I can tell you about. Looking at that one over there.
Dox the cat.
He's sitting in the window watching birds. Yep.
The cat who shall remain unnamed.
Yes. He loves the birds, but not in the same way I do. He loves them for dinner.
I love the birds too. And again, it's in a totally different way.
But yeah, so Apollonian Germ had made a video that he kind of based off some things that I said on Twitter. And so I felt that it deserved a response. Not because I want to cause any drama or anything. I don't want to cause any drama with him, and I have, no hard feelings against him. He's a nice guy, and he makes good content.
Oh yeah, you both seem very level-headed from what I saw, and respectful.
Yeah, he's just coming from a very different perspective, and I think some of the points he raised are common points of misunderstandings with the traditionalist school, and so I thought I would respond to it to clear up some of these misconceptions as a means of just dialoguing about it. And hopefully he'll continue with his series. He has made another video that I do need to do a response to, and I just haven't had time yet. Mainly because that subject isn't entirely within my wheelhouse, and I do want to just do a little bit of reading before I put anything out there and be like, this is what it says, when maybe I'm incorrect. I like to fact check things before I say stuff. But one of the points he brought up, it's a big reason for why I don't put out more videos, because I will spend so much time doing research on something and then feel like, I just don't know enough to actually say anything about this. So when I do say something, it's only because I feel pretty confident.
I wouldn't suspect you to be apologizing for quality over quantity.
Yes, reject the reign of quantity.
Yes.
To insert a little Guinonian into there. But one of the points he raised was in regards. Yeah. He raised a point in regards to race. And I had said, that's just biological materialism. And he took exception to that and kind of said that, no, my race is really important to me. And, I don't accept that it's just biological materialism. And I think this is a point of misunderstanding that a lot of people have. Evola's probably the one who talked the most about this subject. He wrote 2 books on it, The Myth of the Blood and its follow-up, Synthesis of the Doctrine of Race. Myth of the Blood was published by Archetype a couple years ago, so it's still fairly recent. And Synthesis of the Doctrine of Race only just came into English translation this year. From Patriot Publishing, and I think it's only available as a PDF right now. So I did manage to get a hold of that and read it, which was very interesting. And it is in this book that he discusses the race of the soul, the race of the spirit, and the race of the body. And most traditional teachings around the world throughout history have this kind of three-part conception of man, this idea that you have a body, a soul, and a spirit. And Evel is kind of taking that and using race within that context to create a more comprehensive view of race that goes beyond biological materialism.
Without eschewing the biological?
He doesn't eschew the biological. He just puts it in a more in a context proper to tradition and to spirituality. So he's actually kind of like, he is sort of ruthlessly demolishing these sort of racist ideas that come out of anthropological Darwinism, which is actually the kind of, racism that, people, I hesitate to say in the movement because I don't really like that term, but that's what tends to be thought of, is just this biological, material, physical conception of race, your genotype, your phenotype, your psychological traits, your culture, etc. That's all material. And it's kind of similar to talking about breeds of animals. It's actually a really subversive idea. It's very Trotskyite. That's a tangent. I'll get to that in a minute if people are interested, because it's kind of a separate topic. But the idea is like these racist ideas that are born out of anthropological Darwinism. And it's this desire of material science to want to classify and categorize and quantify everything. There's that quantity again, right? But what separates man from animal is that he partakes in this supernatural and suprabiological character. We are not just animals. There is something within us that sets us apart from animals, because animals don't have a holy longing within them. They don't think about, what does it mean to be a cat? What's my relationship to God? Like they don't have the capacity for that. But we do. So what is this essence? And that's kind of what Evel is getting at. And so then he goes on to say, well, we have this race of the soul. And the soul is kind of this intermediate element that lies somewhere between the spiritual suprabiological element and the naturalistic and deterministic elements of the physical body. So it's a kind of establishing the connection between body and spirit as a bridge. Some traditions would refer to the soul as being like the subtle body. But it's important to understand that the soul still belongs to the world of becoming. It is connected to both the vital force as well as the perceptive and passionate faculties. And it's a set of these formative forces that it's more than corporeal, but it's less than spiritual. And it is at work in the body. It does manifest through the body.
The soul is still in a state of becoming.
Yes.
As opposed to just pure being.
Yes, and anybody who's watched episode 9 of the Revolt series will hopefully understand the difference between soul and spirit, because they're often used interchangeably, but spirit is the step up, and spirit comes from the world of being. It has, and I have to emphasize this, your race of the spirit has nothing to do with empty culture or literature or the common intellect or any of that stuff, which are all part of the material world. This is something super rational and super individual. And it is the element upon which virile asceticism and heroic elevation rests. It's the force behind every effort to achieve in life that which is more than life, so to speak. So we can kind of think of spirit being opposed to soul in the way that masculine is opposed to feminine or solar is opposed to lunar. This spirit lies behind the body, behind the blood, behind the soul. And it is this spiritual race that Evola says is the essence. And when we lose that essence, we start to actually lose what it even means to be a part of a particular race. Because I think
how well did he define that, though? In a way, like did he posit? Did he have his own classifications of how you can delineate the spiritual race of this race versus that, and did it align with what we generally understand as biological race?
So he talks about the races of nature versus superior races. And I will emphasize, for the sake of not getting your channel deleted, that superior races does not mean anything to do with white supremacy or any particular color supremacy. What he means by superior race is a race that has access to that spiritual component. They haven't lost it. They're somehow still in touch with that essence. So when he says races of nature, this could include people of any race on Earth. These are people who are not illuminated by any superior element. They're not supported or guided by forces from above. And there's a collective element that predominates in them. So you could find within these races of nature really strong feelings of race and blood ties, but it always represents something that's subpersonal. It's kind of the totemism of the primitive peoples, for example, which is often represented by an animal, which is kind of telling. The collective element that they feel is beneath rather than above. And that's an important distinction here, because we can have that collective feeling of race, but it needs to come from above rather than pulling us from below into the world of becoming, if that makes sense.
I want to get a little more clarity about this. I might be wrong here, but it sounds like in general, we're at least talking about, so he says races of nature. It sounds like he's just using this word race, exploding it in a more general way than we're used to thinking about it right now. So we have to keep that in mind, first of all. So
yes, we need to
follow this.
In order to understand what he's saying, you need to kind of set aside what your definition of race in the vernacular generally is, because he is defining these in different ways. And it is not necessarily correlated to white people, Black people, Asian people. It's not that kind of race.
He's using the word race in a bit of a different way. So I've spoken about this, thought about this myself, is what you're getting at with what you were just saying a moment ago. The idea that one can feel kinship with someone from another ethnic background who has a similar type. So if you're an artist or a spiritual kind of person like you, and you go to Japan and you meet a young woman who has a lot of, in her own, obviously through her own cultural biospirit lens, still kind of has the general type and plays a similar role in her society that you do, that maybe you and her would become friends, and there's a recognition of type, and that's another way people can connect. But if that is where you're going, we've spoken about this here, and there is something to that, but that doesn't mean that you can create that. That's just one element. That's one element. It's like there's many different puzzle pieces that have to fit together. And if you get too out of balance and you then throw everything else out and say, well, we can just make a whole society of people like us, and that's kind of making an idol of type or personality or talent. And it doesn't really work to say we can make a whole country of people, because then it's basically you're just saying you want a nation of your friends. It's like, I want 50 million friends. And I think the more mature stance from what we do is we realize we are people from a European background. It doesn't mean that we all have to be friends. Like if someone tries to throw you off and say, like, do you like every single person of European descent, and can you be friends with no one else from any other ethnic background? No. I've never said that. In fact, I've always talked about this more holistic view. I'm not looking for a nation of 50 million best friends. I'm not that selfish. I recognize that I might get along with other people that are like me from other cultures, but that's still, as I said, it's one piece of the puzzle, and it's not enough to create a sustainable nation or culture or country. Is that kind of what he was getting at with the race of nature, or am I off here?
A little bit. I mean, one of the things that Apollonian Germ said in his video is that he wanted to live with people who were like him. And what does it mean for somebody to be like you? It has to be more. It's more than just having a shared genetic pool, looking like each other, having a shared history or culture. Because I'm sure I'm not alone in saying this because, as people in this milieu, we are a little bit on the outside. I don't feel like I have a lot in common with the average white person. They're not, they are my people in a historical sense, in the sense that there's a shared genetic lineage, but somewhere along the line, they've diverged and become NPCs. These are people who are of a race of nature. They're not elevated.
May I interject something too? Because I've thought about this too. I don't want to get you off track, but yes, there are a lot of, as you said, NPCs today, but could it also be a fact of your type? I'll speak for myself. Tell me if you recognize this in yourself.
Okay.
I recognize that I would probably feel a little set apart in any day and age.
Yes.
So there's that element too.
Yes, there is that element as well. I'm sure I would not fit in too many ages gone past. Maybe my age is yet to come. I don't know.
Or maybe you're just a type. You're just a type in this life that you're. Society needs certain people who can take a step back. Like artists need to be able to take a step back. Anyone who's a writer will tell you, you're sitting in a cafe, you need to be observing social interactions. The second you start getting into that, you take a step back from day-to-day life, that orientation in and of itself is a bit of you're creating a certain distance between you and people who never think that way. And it's not one's better than the other. Obviously, if everyone were like that, society wouldn't work. And I think a lot of people now who are so-called elites have made this fatal error of thinking that they're outliers. They make an idol of that, and then they think they can make a society again of outliers, which doesn't even make sense. You need, even if you realize you might not be the best of friends with the average person, this isn't to sound hoity-toity or elitist, it's just self-knowledge. You still have to realize there needs to be an average, a medium, for you to have the contrast, the contour to play your role and be a little outside of things. You can't make it. It's a paradox to say you create a society of outliers.
Well, the way that this would have been solved in the world of tradition is through a hierarchical social structure.
Yes.
In
Talk
which
about how hierarchy works into this and how we've eschewed hierarchy, and that's made
I mean, people think of like the caste system, right, as being like this race-based thing. And I won't spend too much time on this because I actually talk about it a little bit in the next Revolt episode. And I don't want to spoil it for people who are probably going to watch it. But, it wasn't, the caste system was not just about protecting racial purity. It was about protecting different spiritual castes, which I'll get into more in a second when we get back on that topic. But within a society structured like that, where you are within your own caste proper to you, that allows you to express your nature, your inner nature, your svadharma, to use the Sanskrit term, the caste in which you found yourself born into should have then corresponded to that race of spirit, right? It wasn't just about what you looked like. It was the fact that you actually had the spiritual nature suited to be of that caste. So
would you say, you talk about look like, wouldn't you say there's a physiognomy though, to some degree too?
The physiognomy that people talk about, yes, there's some truth to that. Most of it is that we see today is just kind of an echo of that correspondence between body, soul, and spirit, which we no longer have. Contemporary people no longer have that unity and reciprocal relationship between them, because we're all mixed race in the spirit, technically, and many people don't even have connection with the spirit. But if we had a hierarchical society, then it's not so much a case of being like, well, I don't really feel like I'm connected to that white person over there because they don't think like me and they're of a different caste. It's like, no, because then there becomes this hierarchical relationship between us, and it's a reciprocal relationship where we each have a proper role in society that's recognized and respected by the other. And while the artisan and the priest may not intermingle socially that much, they are still fulfilling a specific role within society that is recognized by everyone else as being really valuable, and they're appreciated for that. Well, we don't have that in this egalitarian society anymore that has this constant downward leveling of everyone, which kind of results in sort of a tall poppy syndrome almost, where, you know, anybody who's, you know, better than anyone else in some way or another, whether they're smarter or creative or good looking or athletic or, you know, whatever the case may be, that's their particular thing that they're really good at.
Or even strives to
No.
be.
Or even strives to be. Yeah, they don't even want us to strive for that, because in order to have equality, you have to chop off everything that sticks above the common denominator,
Right.
which is always the lowest common denominator, because you cannot confer upon people qualities which they don't already have. All you can do is suppress the potential in everyone else and push so it's necessarily a downward leveling. You cannot have equality and an egalitarian society without pushing people down, 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 and you will never be allowed to be better than what the weakest link in the chain can be.
Even though our spheres, whatever you like to call it in general, the wider spheres that we move in, do acknowledge what you just said, that egalitarianism is a false god and all those memes. From what you've observed and you've been involved in, and even casual social media observation, like we were talking about earlier, do you think that the very thing we are talking about now is something that's not talked about enough and not understood enough, and could be a great Achilles heel if we don't? Because right now, in this time of emergency, it is natural to say, and it's well-founded and it's appropriate in a lot of instances, that, look, we're all of this heritage, we're all of these people, we are brothers and sisters, we are in this fight together, we have common enemies, and that's all that matters right now. Yes, it is true. I'm just concerned that in the future, if this kind of thing that we're talking about now is never acknowledged or addressed, then all of these differences that will creep up, there are still differences and hierarchies and spheres within spheres, even if you were in a homogenous nation state or kingdom or whatever the political entity is. And if we don't understand these things and we think we all have to get along and be the same and all be friends just because we're of the same heritage, and we don't understand what you're talking about, do you think this could cause issues down the line, or even now causes
yeah,
confusion?
it already causes issues. And unfortunately, you know, too many people have bought into this egalitarian lie. I mean, it is a lie because it has nothing to do with nature. It's totally against nature. Hierarchies will always try to reemerge. It can't be helped, because we are all different. In order to achieve any kind of real egalitarianism, there has to be, as I said, that downward leveling, this standardization and uniformity. You know, it's kind of like in Brave New World, where they had like the different kind of like different levels of like the clones that they made, and like the lowest quality workers were literally all just clones of each other. Like none of them were individual. They had no capacity for individual thought. They're essentially organic robots, is really a good way to describe it. NPCs, as we call them today. But Brave New World obviously took that a lot further. I don't think it's far-fetched to think that that is, you know, what the elite of the world would even have planned for us. They only want a hierarchy where they're the ones at the top, not a natural hierarchy. And it has to be emphasized that in the world of tradition, the hierarchy was primarily spiritual. You had kind of three main castes. You have the priestly caste at the top, who have the power of the rights. You have the warrior caste, and you have the landowners, the patriciates. And then below that is the plebs, basically, which is the majority of people who don't have the power of the right and who don't have that transcendent connection. They aren't capable of it themselves. And they need that hierarchy in place if they are ever to have a chance at grasping at a divine connection. it has to come from them. It has to come to them from people who are capable of doing that for themselves, because the plebs are not capable of doing that for themselves. And that's not to say that, oh, they're worthless and we shouldn't care about them, because in that traditional hierarchy, contrary to popular modern belief, it wasn't about the plebs enriching the people at the top and that being built off the backs of the masked man. It was about the people at the top having this responsibility to those below them to lift them up as much as was possible. And they took that responsibility very seriously. So it was, it really was much more of a sense of connectedness and community and social responsibility to each other within that hierarchy that was based around a shared spiritual concept. But should I go back to what I was saying before? Because I feel like I sort of left people hanging when I was answering your question before about like the races
I
of
think in the
nature.
interest of how we started, you should go with the path of least resistance, and whatever makes you feel happiest and most open, just start talking about.
Well, I can go back to that because I don't want to leave people hanging with just like half the information. So yeah, the people of the races of nature, you know, these are this happens when a person's center falls not in the normal place of the spirit, which is where it should be, but it falls either in the soul element or the body element, and it is then that lower element that kind of assumes the directive role in a person's life. And when man has degraded himself to such an extent, he does pass into this purely animal way of life. And one thing I do want to point out is that you know, the materialistic and scientific racists, and I use this term in the way that Evola uses it because at the time he was writing, of course, racist did not have the negative connotation that it had today, and it's used in almost like a philosophical school of thought, right? It's like, oh, the postmodernists, the empiricists, the racists, you know, it's just this particular field. But those kind of materialistic and scientific racists, they focused mainly on just the races of nature because that's where you can see those quantifying categorical views that where they've identified each race with a particular set of qualities. That's where you see it most accurately reflected is in the races of nature, simply because it's undisturbed by any active intervention from the higher elements, which you cannot identify through empirical scientific means. So when we then get into talking about like these superior races that you were asking about, you know, the purpose of the body is to be a vehicle to express the spirit. This is where the physiognomy kind of comes in. Ideally, you know, your body is an expression of those higher forces. And when there is a mismatch between the two, the spirit cannot be properly expressed. And it can, you know, it kind of creates a blockage to any higher achievement in that sense.
How would it be possible for there to be a mismatch? I don't understand that element where they say that like now someone can be physically beautiful but be ugly inside. You can say, oh, look at this Hollywood star. They're physically beautiful, but they're ugly inside. But in this golden age in the past, it wasn't like that. And the way it's supposed to be is that physical beauty corresponds to spiritual beauty. Well, if these spiritual laws are the most fundamental thing, even more fundamental than scientific study of materialism, how could we be in an age when this law now doesn't apply?
Because people are no longer in touch with that spiritual center. They've lost that connection. They are literally just animals in human form. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense at all. They are people who are not guided by any kind of spiritual orientation. There's
But
nothing
it's up to the
above.
person? Like if it's still, I still don't get it. If it's a spiritual law that your physiognomy reflects in this kind of higher cosmic hierarchy, this great chain of being, or however it's conceived, if it's an echo, if your physical beauty is an echo of something else, how is that like a spiritual cosmic law in one era but not another? How do the traditionalists explain that?
It's just the degeneration that, I mean, it's kind of like the law of entropy, really. So Initially, do I want to go into talking about the Hyperboreans? Is that a little too out there for people?
I'm also, before you get there, I do have to say, with all this talk, just to kind of get it, and I love these kind of conversations, but for people who might be wondering about connecting certain dots with what we talk about here and why we're all here now in this moment in history, if Evel is talking so much about this, the race of nature, and that there's something going on beyond the biological, did he write anything? It's been a few years since I've read some of his stuff. Did he write anything that ultimately brings all this together in a practical way and says, and I would think, what I know of Evola, he would be interested in this question. It would be a central question to him. What does this mean for an actual political unity? What was his thesis on what a nation is and how that what do you organize people around if it's not just common heritage? Or is it common heritage with just more with these colored in more with this idea of race of nature, which again, to me in a crude way, I'm still understanding as typology.
Yeah, you could understand it in that sense. Trying to think of how to answer your question in a way that isn't overly wordy or wandering off on different tangents. In terms of what that would mean for, practical political purposes and stuff. I mean, I do kind of go into this in the next Revolt episode because that's the life and death of civilizations episode. And this topic of, race is really closely linked to that for him. Politically, we end up with what we see today, right? We have, there is no unity. It's hard to find a commonality with people. Common heritage doesn't really seem to be enough. For the vast majority of white people, they don't care that they are, that other white people are their people. They don't even see it like that. Like they don't even have any awareness of race unless they're apologizing for their race, and that's not the way the ancients thought of it. To them, they didn't really speak of race just because race was just something that you had. It was an integral part of them, and that is because of that spiritual component. So, when you're thinking of like the races of nature as kind of just typology, it's think of them as people who have lost that spiritual chrism. Now, from the traditionalist perspective, we all have descended at some point from a primordial race that did have that really strong divine connection, where it was, those divine traits were just, it just existed in them in a certain purity that was expressed perfectly through the body. And as time goes on, it just degenerates because you need something to keep that spark alive. And that's hard to do. There's so many factors that go into that. This is just, you have to just kind of see it as part of a cycle that just needs to complete itself. And it sucks for us because of the part of the cycle we're born into. And it's, we don't feel like we belong in this time. He doesn't think that process can be reversed. He does think it needs to be just followed through. There are maybe things you can do to slow it down, but ultimately there needs to be a rebirth that comes at the end of it all. So it's a little bit blackpilling, but it shouldn't be too much, just because, as I said kind of at the start of our talk, whatever you build up in yourself internally, no one can take away. And you can build up that superior race within yourself, even if the rest of your race doesn't want to go along with you to do that. And you kind of try to get back in touch with that. You're looking a little confused. Am I not answering your question very well?
No, you are.
Okay.
Well, I am interested I was going to say I wanted to hear more about what spiritual chrism is defined as. But first, did he say that there was a political order or entity that could arise from this, or that was his thesis just that because we're in the Kali Yuga, because we're in the Dark Age, that's not even the right question to be asking right now? There's not enough people with enough spiritual virility that could organize such an entity.
Yeah, it's probably not even the right question to be asking. Like, well, what can we do to change this? Well, Evola says changing
Roger
it isn't
Tiger.
possible. It's not possible without an inner awakening. That's the first step. And people are wanting to look 10 steps ahead. Well, how can I get my ethno state and revive my race and get all my people to be proud of being who they are and want to preserve our culture? And the answer is, well, you can't without the inner awakening, because you cannot reverse that trend. You cannot go backwards in time. And of course, Evola takes a very long view of history. And he's saying that even, 6,000 to 8,000 BC was already the first stages of kind of the degeneration that we see. It's not a case of going back to the 1950s or the Middle Ages or the Roman Empire or any of that. Like, those people were already degenerated. And he says that there's reasons to believe that this Olympian state existed as a reality in the primordial man, in the Hyperborean man, where something truly divine and supernatural actually just existed immanently within them. And he talks a lot about initiation, but the thing to remember here is that initiation itself even represents a degeneration, because now you're having to go through this process of the second birth to reclaim that which used to just exist innately. And the consecration then being a degeneration further still.
What was his reasoning for thinking that existed? And it's not just this wish for some golden age as a maybe very sophisticated form, but albeit still escapism. I do remember reading about Hyperborean myths in his short, but it's not a very well-known book of his, but his book on the Grail mystery. Very interesting, because that is something that is very pan-European. And I think that there is something to that reason why we respond to the Arthurian Grail cycle so much and how it shows up. We associate it mainly with Britain, maybe France, from the some of the literature we have, but there's King Arthur and the Round Table is you find echoes of it in a lot of parts of Europe. So I want to hear more about that Hyperborean thing, and maybe it can relate to what I was beginning to ask a moment ago with this whole idea of spiritual chrism and losing that element, what that means and what we've lost. And I'm sure all of this relates.
All right. Well, let me give kind of an overview of the Hyperboreans, because it's probably a little bit out there for some people, and it's not a topic that I expect people to, it's not common knowledge, basically. So the reason Evola believes this is because this is something that is found in traditional teachings all over the world. This idea of this Arctic homeland in the Golden Age. Well, why was it in the Arctic? That's the question that people first ask, because, well, nobody can live in the Arctic. Why would anybody believe that the Arctic was like this temperate, lovely climate? And this goes into some ideas of polar symbolism. A really great book on this is Jocelyn Godwin's Arctos. It can be a little bit tedious because he's sort of going into like what all of these different like esoteric people think about like the Earth's axis and stuff like that. But if you can get through that, there's some really good stuff in it. The general idea is that we have, and if you watch episode 4 of Revolt, where we talk about polar symbolism, this might resonate a little bit more. This idea of a vertical pole. Put my arm in the camera so people understand what vertical is, because who doesn't know that, right? So when you have this pole as an axis, this axis of the world, the axis within ourselves as man walking upright, we represent that axis symbolically. You have stability. When the axis tips, it goes off its center. Think of like a wheel turning, and that axis is off center or it's loose in some way. It's a really bumpy ride. Suddenly, the rotation isn't smooth. It's not perfectly circular. Now it's a little bit elliptical and wobbly. And where's our stable foundation gone? This is where the process of degeneration starts, symbolically speaking. So if we had the Earth's axis perfectly vertical, that would render The central band around the Earth, the equatorial region, completely uninhabitable, be far too hot. But the poles, the Arctic and the Antarctic, would both be temperate. You would have basically a perpetual spring in the Arctic with days of 12 hours and nights of 12 hours equally all year round. Sounds like a pretty nice place to live. Kind of like a Garden of Eden, where the weather's always just great.
It sounds like what Groundhog Fury drew on the back of your book, Jason, that scene. But go on.
Yeah, so I mean, who wouldn't want to live somewhere where it's always spring? You can grow lots of food. You got plenty of time for leisure to sit around and be spiritual. The theory is that at some point, and there's many different ideas as to how this happened or why it happened, that I won't go into. You can read Godwin's book on that if you want, because he goes into every theory that people have. Somehow that axis started to tilt. And now you have the Arctic getting progressively colder and uninhabitable. Well, what's going to happen to people who live there? Same thing that always happens. They have to migrate. So the Hyperboreans were what he calls a superior race, which I never really did get to define, but I can come back to that if people are interested in it. I probably should, just to for clarity.
Yes,
but
please.
They're
Please.
Should I say what a superior race is before I go on to explain the Hyperborean story?
For the sake of the channel, yes, please.
For the sake of the channel, okay. So basically, a superior race, like certain races, lineages, or castes, were said to have divine origins, and that they embody like these heroic or celestial traits that were passed down from this divine founder of their lineage. So in superior races, this purity of the blood, this ethnic purity, that's no longer sufficient to define the rank or essence of that human group. The main criteria then becomes their divinity. And this is what separates the aristocracy from the plebeian races of nature. So you only can pass from the race of nature to the race of spirit when a force from above manifests. And then no longer does man's biological conditioning, that is his genetics, define his value, but rather the opposite, where his value actually defines his biology. And you can think of this in the sense that spirit uses nature as its raw material, but it never allows itself to be reduced to nature. It's simply the body then just bears witness to the presence and forming action of something higher. So in the inferior man, the race begins and ends on the biological level. It's collectively predetermined, extraneous to any kind of creative initiative. And in superior man, that race must be sought elsewhere. Even though it will still manifest biologically, the essence of it has to be found in the spirit. And this is what Evelyn means by a superior race, one that has that spiritual essence, and that spiritual essence is the foundation of who they are. It's the source of their value. So a lot of what is studied as biological race now is just the echoes left in the body of that sort of remote and exhausted formative action from above that we used to have, or that the Hyperboreans used to have. So even where races can be found that have kind of retained biological purity, which is hard to find these days, but there are certainly like tribes around the world that are very isolated that are, you could say that they're fairly pure because they just have had no contact with the outside world. That higher racial aspect is defunct. Well, what's happened to it? It's degenerated over time. And this takes us kind of back to the Hyperboreans. So what happens? The Hyperboreans have to leave the Arctic. There were other races on Earth at this time who had already degenerated into races of nature, even though they were once superior races. There are some traditional reasons for believing that there was once a primordial Antarctic race that later would have descended into the Lemurians, who are the ancestors of most of the Southern Hemisphere races, the Sub-Saharan Africans, Australian Aboriginals, some of the Pacific Islanders, South Asians, Southern Hemisphere, obviously, because if the equatorial region was uninhabitable, it actually creates a massive geographical barrier for any kind of mixing in that regard. But obviously, as the Earth's axis tilts, we have migration from peoples all over the world. The Hyperboreans start to leave the Arctic. So a lot of traditions teach some variation of this. And Evola's...
I was going to say their main reason for taking this seriously is that it's just these ideas are found all over the planet.
Yes. And that's how it is with the traditionalist school in general. It's when they're looking for these echoes within these traditions all over the world. And when you start to see the same theme repeated everywhere, like, for example, the flood story. Every culture has got a flood story.
Right.
Why? These people who never had any contact with each other had the same story. Well, that suggests that maybe there's something there worth looking into, whether we take it literally or we take it metaphorically and symbolically. You know, the traditionalists are looking at that and saying, okay, there's something here that's at least worthy of investigation. So that's why Evola believes this Hyperborean theory is just simply because it's repeated throughout tradition so many times, and in particular from the cultures that he thinks descend from Hyperboreans, because obviously other cultures wouldn't have that story. So he says there's three main waves of migration. The first wave, the earliest one, was this transversal wave going northwest to southeast that reached down into India and Persia, the so-called oldest civilizations. They retained their Hyperborean spirituality mostly intact because they were the first to leave. They didn't suffer the effects that the later ones did. So the second wave was horizontal. It went from west to east after the deluge and sinking of Atlantis. And he believes that Atlantis was created as kind of a reflection of the Hyperborean center. This Atlantean center was colonized prior to the migration. They migrated across into the Mediterranean, Egypt, so on and so forth. And then the third wave came later, the final one, after the Arctic was already becoming quite cold, having very long and harsh winters. That was the vertical migration north to south down through Europe. Mostly North and Central Europe, Scandinavia. And this was a route that they'd already previously followed for as colonizers. This is how the cult of Apollo came to Greece. And he says there's overlapping of these waves crossing through Europe. And so it kind of contributes to this composition of just successive ethnic strata. But the thing to realize about this third wave, this final wave, is, well, many people would say, well, the Scandinavians, the Nordic type, to use kind of a more archaic term, they're the most racially pure from the standpoint of the body, but least so from the standpoint of spirit. Well, why is that the case? How is it that people in India have retained this metaphysical tradition so well, but our people in Europe haven't? And this is Evola's answer to that. And there's this kind of concept of, the eternal winter of the soul. The longer they remained in these inhospitable conditions, the more impossible it became for them not to undergo a certain materialization. And that is, they developed certain physical qualities, but also they developed, character, courage, resistance, inventiveness, good qualities, but as a counterpart of this atrophied spiritual side. Because you can't really develop and maintain spirituality when, you're wondering where your next meal is going to come from, because suddenly, you find that your planting season is getting shorter and shorter and your winters are getting longer and longer. And you're thinking about where you're going to have to move. It was a mistake that they maybe stayed there as long as they did. So while, they preserved a certain type of the body, they lost their spirituality. They lost that connection to the divine. And Evola says that this inner degeneracy is kind of shown by the relative ease of which the Northern Europeans converted first to Catholicism and then to Protestantism, and then now the new religion of atheism, and maybe someday in the future soon to be Islam. I mean, they're unable to oppose anything important in the spiritual domain, but they're fascinated by the external splendor of these things. It's easy to see how, like, Catholicism, when it was in its, at its peak, was really an aesthetically impressive religion in many ways that might be very attractive to a person who has that kind of innate holy longing and maybe isn't really sure why, and they don't really have a tradition anymore of knowing what to do with that. And so they don't have, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish the thought.
They just kind of don't have that sort of spiritual chrism anymore that you asked about, that quality within them, that divine essence anymore. But I think there's maybe like a collective memory that, well, we should have this and we want this, but there's no point of reference for it anymore.
Where do you think we need to be very careful here, though, with otherizing places like India, and something that we speak about here, I've spoken about, that it's easy to act like, and certainly we live in a day and age where this narrative is reinforced. So I have to wonder how much of that is an ingredient as well, where I know someone in the chat earlier said, and this was much earlier in the show, so I don't know what this person thinks now, but they were saying, this sounds Eastern. And you're explaining how, well, there's a common root, and some people went further afield into what became India and had it influence there. I think we all know, to varying degrees, there's different theories about that. I think we've probably all heard those to some degree. But where do you draw a line or caution for our people of European descent to get into this? And it's kind of a roundabout way that's still, it's like we're saying that we need to know who we are, and it's still putting the locus of something that's more spiritual or developed outside of our immediate purview. And let's face it, there's a great danger to that.
What do you see as being the danger?
In that putting the locus of something quote unquote more spiritual or more evolved in something that is too far afield from your own native culture is going to reinforce the psychological damage that's been done on us, where we're being told, and we've been told for the last several decades, that we're not as authentic, we're not as earthy, we're not as connected to nature and the cycles and the rhythm.
That's so subversive.
All of that.
This whole yes, the idea of the noble savage, right?
Yes.
Which comes out of the Enlightenment. And this idea that humanity is evolving, ever evolving, and some people are more evolved than others. No, from a traditional perspective, this is so wrong. We are devolving. It's not a process of evolution, it's a process of involution. So to say that this race is more evolved than another, it's no, this race is less degenerated than the other, simply because they just haven't had as much time to get there, but they are still going to get there in the end, because that's just the cycle of history. There can be a temptation to kind of want to feed the ego with those sort of like supremacy ideas, which is why I really wanted to clarify what superior race actually meant. But in terms of what you're saying about like this damage of feeling like, like Europeans are being told that, oh, we don't have, this spirituality, we're not as in touch with nature, blah, blah, blah. Well, it is true that as a result of the eternal winter of the European soul, we have been very susceptible to the rise of scientism. And you can look around and see how it has almost become a religion to many people in the West. But this idea that we need to be more in touch with nature is also a very degenerated idea, because nature is the world of becoming. It's a force pulling from below. It's the totemism of the primitive peoples. It's not something we want to aim for. And this is something we'll get into more in the second half of the Revolt Against the Modern World, as to why this is the case, because it's too complex of a topic to really go into here. But
let me just say, in touch with nature is a very loose term. I mean, that could be interpreted in many ways. Obviously, our people are the ones who we start organizations to save forests and everything, but we're told we're not in touch with nature. So in that way, I wouldn't say it's
Yeah,
totemism.
and
Being a steward of the earth is different than a chthonic totemism that you're talking about. I just want to make sure that's stated for the record.
exactly. Being a steward of the earth is when you are in your proper hierarchy as a man relates to nature, knowing that these are things that are given into your care during your time here. They are not for you to exploit or abuse or destroy. That the fact that people do exploit, abuse, and destroy the earth and the animals is a legitimate criticism. However, it has nothing to do with us not being in touch with nature, in the sense that, you know, we don't need to be like tree huggers and doing all this weird new agey matriarchal cult stuff, Mother Earth kind of stuff, which is this is not in line with a Hyperborean or Olympian tradition at all, and will lead you down the wrong path. But when you are connected to spirit and you see your role in that hierarchy, and you see that you need to kind of try to represent that divine order on earth, then you can be in touch with nature in that hierarchical way where you are a good steward of it. Much in the way that we were talking about before with the hierarchy of a society where the people at the top have this massive responsibility and obligation to take the best care of the people below them that they can, to look out for their spiritual and material well-being and to raise them up. You know, so too do we need to behave that way towards the environment and towards animals. Like this idea that, you know, I don't want to attack anybody's religion, but like I hear people say the Bible says that God gave the animals to us, therefore we can just eat them all and kill them. And it's like, you can take, you know, what you need and do it in a humane way if that's what you need to do to feed yourself. But the idea that we have some God-given right to set up factory farms where animals are treated horrifically and live in the most terrible conditions, humanity should be condemned for that. And when people say, oh, we're out of touch with nature because we treat animals like that, well, that's a legitimate criticism. I can't disagree with that, because that's horrible. And it's those are the kind of things that are indicative of how far away we have fallen from our connection with the race of the spirit.
Right. I realized too, I just wanted to say for clarity's sake, you used race of nature before when you're talking about Hyperborea in a way that made it sound like there were other peoples that were in an already degenerated state. And we were talking about race of nature earlier in the conversation tonight, when I thought, when we were talking about typology, I thought he was saying it's a race of your type of nature. That's what I was talking about. When I connected it to typology, I thought he was saying Evola was trying to articulate that not only are you connected to other people by a common biology, but you're also connected to people by your nature. Like I said,
oh, right. Now your question makes a little more sense to me,
like
because
you
I
get
was
along with artist, like an artist is going to get along with another artist, at least to some degree, even if
that's more in the realm of race of the soul.
Okay.
Like it's like how many of us we have, like within our own immediate families, we feel like we've got a family member that we just do not have anything in common with. Like, oh my gosh, this person is so different from me. How can she be my sister? Right.
They're siblings. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, you've come from the same parents, you're raised in the same household, and you're like miles apart. There's just like such a disconnect. Well, clearly you're related to each other.
That's a microcosm of what I was getting at before.
Yeah, but then there's that.
We need to be realistic. We need to be realistic about that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so there's a discrepancy there already, even within a family, different races of soul. And just, you know, it's not even a case of seeing eye to eye. Like, for example, like with the Hindu classification of caste and stuff, you know, your Brahmins, your Kshatriyas, your Vaishyas, your Shudras. It used to be that if your parents were Brahmins, well, of course you were a Brahmin. Now, you had to take initiation to be legitimately accepted as a member of that caste, but there was no question that you were of the right material to be initiated. Now it's not the case. Now you might have a child who is more of a Brahmin nature, born to two Shudra parents. I mean, the vast majority of my relatives are farmers. They're very they're not intellectual people at all. They're very earthy people. They're Shudras. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, because I love my relatives and they're great people, but we can't connect. We don't understand each other. We don't see the world in the same way, even though we're related by blood. There's this discrepancy between the race of the soul.
That's the same mechanism I was getting at earlier when I was asking about physiognomy. And this idea of like why the traditionalists think that there was like a one-to-one relationship in some past age, but now it's all topsy-turvy and everything's all confused.
Yes, that kind of gets into the problem of crossbreeds, which Evola does talk about. But I wasn't sure if you would want me to talk about it, because it can be a little bit of a touchy subject, even though he's not.
we're probably winding down for tonight anyway, and we're probably
it's a subject that is hard to discuss without offending people on both sides if they are not able to keep an open mind about it. Yeah. So maybe we table that for another time. But that is essentially, this sort of mixing that occurs.
Sure.
That results in this disunity between the body, soul, and spirit, and results in the fact that there's literally nobody on earth anymore who has that unity in the way that the primordial races did.
Right. But if you have like a little bit of it, then it might express itself in one person every few generations, hence the person.
It does reside atavistically there. Genius. And maybe I should just clear up one point on the issue of crossbreeds, because it was something that people had a lot of questions about when I did release that trad video. This idea that, what can a mixed race person do? Can they still achieve any kind of spiritual liberation? Well, the answer is yes, of course they can. It might be harder for them in some ways, but the deleterious character of crossbreeding isn't so much found in any distortion of a bodily type. It's because of cases where the internal and external races no longer correspond, where you've got the body in contrast to the soul, and the soul in turn contradicts the spirit, and so on and so forth.
Is that maybe because the metaphysical, you talked about the physical aspect, but the metaphysical aspect of the earth being off its axis?
Yeah, I can kind of relate to that a little bit. Yeah, it's basically, it's giving rise to people who really just, so to speak, no longer find anyone at home.
Can we get really out there for one quick second?
And
then Jason looks like he's ready to read some chats, and we're gonna have to go pretty soon. Even though it might come in the guise of things that people are very dubious on, aka New Age talk. This is reminding me.
None of this is New Age. This is all very old. New Age stuff that's co-opted this is all crap. Just disregard New Age stuff.
You talk about theosophy. I'm stating that as a preface for what I'm about to say.
Okay.
What you talk about with the axis is exactly what all the 2012 stuff was talking about. Now, some people said, well, 2012 wasn't really the date, or it's just a threshold, but we're in an era now where there is a realignment. Do you have any knowledge of that? Do you give any credence to that? Do you think that we might be living through an era where now, even though it's going to take a while, it's not going to happen overnight, that we're actually, all of us are now we're living in an era when we cross some kind of a threshold, and we've gone to the bottom, and now we're going to come out of the trough? Because from what I remember of the 2012 stuff, everything you said about the axis being off center now, that's exactly what it was talking about.
Unfortunately, we are only in the beginning of the Kali Yuga, which is 432,000 years. However, not to black pill anybody, there are cycles within cycles. And there is going to be a little 10,000 year mini golden age that's kind of comes up within the Kali Yuga, a little bit of a revival. That is perhaps what is being referred to there. I do know some people believe that that has already begun. And even though it doesn't seem like it now, because it seems like the world is just rapidly getting worse, right?
Well, when an animal's backed into a corner, it fights back the hardest.
Yes. And the death throes are the most violent.
Yes.
So we have to have hope that maybe we are on the brink of something better. Astrologically speaking, I know a lot of people are putting stock into this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction coming up in December, as they both move into the sign of Aquarius. Personally, I don't do the whole age of Aquarius thing because I think people, I don't know. I have a lot of reasons for that. I won't get into that. It's too long. But I don't think it's the beginning of the age of Aquarius.
Our friend Laura Lee, I don't know if you've ever listened to her, but she told me in a private conversation last October, she told me 2012 is shaping up. She told me what it was going to look like. There was a certain conjunction in January. Then the year was going to be nuts. And everything she said about it was actually pretty spot on.
So that was at the start of the year, we had Saturn and Pluto conjunct in the sign of Capricorn, and then Jupiter joined them.
Yep.
Some very transformational, world-changing stuff happening as a result. I know a few astrologers who even predicted a pandemic out of it.
Yeah. The halfway point, by the way, between this one and the last one was 3 weeks before September 11th. And now we're COVID-19. We're 19 years after 9/11. And obviously things that were tried to be pushed out then, we're now seeing it's gone to a different level. So there's interesting ways to slice it, whether you believe in that stuff or not. It could be fascinating to consider.
It's going to be a rough few years for sure. The U.S. is going through its Pluto return right now, which is very transformational, very intense. And that's going to last a while because Pluto is a very slow-moving planet. I want to say through 2023, 2024, it's going through its Pluto return. So it's going to definitely be an interesting time in the short term, but we can hope that the transformation that comes out of it will give rise to something better.
Let's return to where we began. You're sovereign, your own being. So stay. That's what Jason and I tell you every week. You're the king and the queen of your own mind and spirit, first and foremost. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Kat, but I think you would approve of that message.
Sure.
With that,
we shall jump in and say the tap has been wide open on everything esoteric tonight. We do have a financial gift from Slots over here on Cash App. Thank you very much, my dear brother. And he financially gives the great hero $5. Said everything he wanted to say with those $5. Thank you, brother, for that gift to White Wellbeing. I'm going to also jump over here to D Live, where very early in the night we had Hyrith give us a diamond's worth of points. And she writes here, can't wait for the next Revolt episode. And then again, another diamond's worth of points from Hyrith. Thank you very much, dear lady, writing, hello, beautiful people. 3 of my favorites. Well, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And another diamond of points from Hyrith. And she writes this time, PhilosophiCat, you are a great inspiration to me. Very kind of you for saying that. Thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. I love her music, so that's really nice to hear.
Yeah, it is fantastic. You're absolutely right. Boomer, gone wild, gives us a diamond's worth of points. Says everything he wanted to say there. Thank you very much. And that's everybody over on D Live. And we have Donning Armor with a question that has waited the course of the night. Thank you so very much, Donning Armor. And he asks PhilosophiCat, on your opinion, opinions of atheism versus anti-theism. What is PhilosophiCat's opinions? Please go ahead.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume by anti-theism he kind of means like the really militant atheists who don't want anyone else to believe in a religion or just like relentlessly attacking religion, versus like an atheism where it's just like, well, I don't believe in God, but I don't care what other people believe.
Must be that.
Geez, I went through a period in my youth where I like just completely rejected religion, and it's, you know, I guess it was kind of a necessary stage of my own development, but I went through a period of just being relentlessly like anti-religion, and I hated everything about it, and I was just like militantly attacking it at every chance I got. And you know, I really regret it now, and I feel like it's one of those things. What's the saying? Like, a little bit of philosophy will make you an atheist, and a lot of philosophy will bring you back to God, or something to that extent. And I feel like that's essentially what happened to me. Was I had a little bit of philosophy, and it was like, religion is so bad, especially because I was getting drunk on Enlightenment era thinkers, right? Which it can only lead you to materialism in that sense. And then, you know, as I came back and I got older and more mature and studied the classics again and stuff, and got more into spirituality again, I was like, oh, geez, what a mistake I made. And I actually feel like really guilty for anybody that I might have like turned on to a path of atheism as a result of that. So I was so outspoken about it. It was really, really a terrible thing to have done. I'm sure I have some bad karma as a result. So I've got to try to undo my karma.
You've done it. You've done it. Let go.
I hope so.
It's in your head, Kat. I'm telling you. You don't say that publicly. Don't reinforce it. It's over.
Thank you. I'll remember that.
Well, it has absolutely been a very interesting night. A lot of topics discussed here that I had very little knowledge of. And just for those with the initials AI, we never say the name, but we just go by the initials of our dear friend AI, who's listening, that on this channel, we were only discussing theory. If you want fact, you have to go to CNN. So that's what we said. Everything here was theory, and you have to make sure you get the other side of the coin. Make sure you get to those folks. Hey, before we wrap up tonight, I want to thank Kat for coming on with us. She's always a fantastic guest, knowledgeable. I mean, look at this lady. She's knowledgeable, intelligent, so educated, intelligent, talented singer, a musician, contributor in many different ways. And last but certainly not least, she's a beautiful woman. And so very thankful that you are one of our dear sisters and that you could show up and appear with us today here on The Tap. If you would, please let folks know what you're working on and where they can find you.
Oh, well, thank you for that, Jason. It's always nice to be back, and it's certainly been a little while since I got to chat with you guys. Hopefully I didn't ramble on like too much, but I actually have never had a chance to really like talk about this subject and flesh it out before. So I've maybe a little bit of verbal diarrhea going on there.
No.
Hopefully it wasn't too confusing or hard to follow.
People were enjoying it and very engaged.
Okay, good. So yeah, well, it was fun, and I'm glad we did it. So people can obviously find me on my YouTube channel or on Twitter or Telegram. I have to say I really don't do much with Facebook. I do have one, but I just I don't know. I find it annoying to use.
Probably for the
So
best.
those are YouTube, and I do have a BitChute as well. I can't upload directly to it, so it's only mirrored from my YouTube channel. If my YouTube channel goes down, I can't really upload anything to BitChute. So fingers crossed. Every day I wake up and I'm like, is it still there? But yeah, so hopefully next week we should have episode 10 of the Revolt series out. It's going to be about an hour long, so it's our longest one yet. Kind of goes more into this topic and the life and death of civilization. So if maybe having watched this, you'll be able to even appreciate and understand more what's being said in episode 10. I've seen a few clips of it now from what George has been working on with the video, and it looks amazing. As usual, he just has outdone himself again. So I don't know exactly what day we'll do that yet, but when I have a date ready, we'll announce the premiere time on Twitter and other social media.
Yeah, all very high production quality of what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Representing things well. Well, for us, Jason and I have our shared site, theafterparty.tv. So you can watch this show once it's in replay there. We catalog everything. We include YouTube and BitChute links, but we also go a step further, and the videos are embedded in posts on our site. We're thinking posterity. We don't want to be at the mercy of fickle social media companies. So a lot of work goes into that. Please do bookmark the site. Think of that first, especially if you woke up tomorrow, like Kat said, and Jason, either one of us or both of us weren't on your favorite social media platform anymore. Please do go see theafterparty.tv. It's a catalog of what we do, and also a lot of community generated material as well. So there's that. My own site is thegreatorder.com. What I do, video content, and otherwise, all is cataloged there. It's just a running tally of what I do. Music very soon. This is going to be a big thing. I haven't, this is a whole new part of my public life, is I'm a musician myself. So we'll have more to talk about with that. Jason and I will be doing a multi-guest Halloween stream starting at 7 p.m. Eastern next Saturday, the 31st. So please come hang out with us for a fun evening like we did last year. I'm going to do another one. We had a terrific time. Going to have some great guests. Look to our site and our social media for more announcements about that, who's going to be on. But I think that is it for now, Mr. Köhne.
Well said, good sir. And thank you very much for all of your efforts to make sure that these shows are edifying, as well as over the course of the night. Me and several others were celebrating how great of an interviewer you are and how great of an interviewee Kat is. So this was absolutely splendid, and we will be doing it again soon. I want to thank everybody who showed up on all the different, we had people on every single platform. That doesn't always happen. So there were people watching on every single platform tonight. I want to give a big thank you to everyone watching live and in replay, everybody who was participating in the chat tonight. Big thank you to all of you, Slots, for financially gifting over the course of the night as well. Thank you, my dear brother. And let me spotlight a few people in just a moment after I thank our great moderators who are always doing a splendid job. And it is a contribution that they give of their time and their talent and their intelligence when they do so. We give a big thanks to Ezra and Raymond, and I think HB, if he did any moderating today. We also had Bartleby. I know Roy was with us, but I don't think he had time to do any moderation. So it was good seeing him, because he normally does take up the wrench and wield it heavily against all those who want to bring down the channel or upset those who might make us look like other than we are.
Roy, you deserved a night off.
Yes, he did indeed.
Just to listen.
Absolutely. So a big thank you and a spotlight to, let's see, Kim Bear was with us tonight, so a spotlight on her. So was Carissa Wilson, as was King Elvis. So a big salute and spotlight to you. How about Southern Stoic was with us? That's a great name. And Ron Middlebrook was also with us. Great to see you all with us tonight. It was a fantastic time. So was William Runner coming in here at the end. Always one of our favorites. It's been great, folks. And Jared and I look forward to seeing you all again next time.